Welcome, everybody, to Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle, the author of Writing That Gets Noticed, Find Your Voice, Become a Better Storyteller, Get Published, and it is now a course at NYU and an elective towards the journalism certificate. Every week, I speak with novelists, with authors, with writers of every niche to talk about their tips, their tricks, their strategies, and how the sauce is made, including creative advice. I'll talk about essays and articles and share my own experience from 3 decades of publishing. So join me every week and grow your business and build your craft with Freelance Writing Direct. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes, and follow along on Substack, where I share special clips for subscribers only at estelleserasmus.substack.com. Hi, everybody. It's Estelle Erasmus, and I'm so excited to tell you about a webinar that I'm doing on May 23rd from 1 to 2:30 for Writer's Digest called Making Your Mark with Micro Memoir. And you'll learn how to write your 200-word and under essays to get an editor's attention. And micro memoir are short, standalone pieces that explore a moment in time that are drawn from personal experience. And I'll break down and work through every step with you. And my students have recently been published in the Tiny Love Story section of the New York Times and in other micro memoir sites that are submitted for literary awards. So I hope to see you there. You can find all the information on how to register in the show notes. Bye. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, the author of Writing That Gets Noticed, that poets and writers have just named as one of the best books for writers. And I'm so happy to have Bob Eckstein with us today. I have so much to tell you about Bob, but let me first give you his bio. Bob Eckstein is an award-winning writer, New Yorker cartoonist, and author of the New York Times bestselling Footnotes from the World's Greatest Bookstores, and has been speaking publicly for years against online shopping to raise awareness for independent bookstores. Bob Eckstein's humor has appeared in Mad, McSweeney's, National Lampoon, The New York Times, Reader's Digest, Spy, Wall Street Journal, and publications worldwide. His work has been exhibited in the Cartoon Art Museum of San Francisco, the Smithsonian Institute, the Cartoon Museum of London, and many others. Eckstein has spoken in over 200 TV and radio shows like Good Morning America and places like NYPL, Miami Book Fair, the Norman Rockwell Museum, and the Grolier Club. He teaches writing and cartooning around the world, including the School of Visual Arts, New York University, where I teach, Pratt Institute, and Yonsei University in South Korea. And his new book, which everyone can see in the background in the YouTube version, is Footnotes from the Most Fascinating Museums, Stories and Memorable Moments from People Who Love Museums. And it's a beautiful book, and everyone should see it, and we'll talk about it. And I also have the complete book of cat names, and Bob signed this for me at the Writer's Digest conference this past summer. And we're both contributing editors to Writer's Digest. I'm a new contributing editor, although I've been teaching there since 2016 and contributing. And I wrote the All About the Pitch column. So we have so much to talk about. And I do want to also mention that Bob is the premier expert on snowmen, right? He had a book about snowmen, and he interviewed experts and historians. And so I just wanted to kind of fully round out your bio. And we first met at the Writer's Digest conference, and I was honored that you drew me there. And he is a brilliant cartoonist. And then most recently, we were both faculty at the amazing Irma Bombeck conference, where Bob drew so many of the speakers, and he also drew the keynotes like Anna Quindlen and Zibby Owens, who I just did an event with the other day. And everyone who is faculty got this amazing, beautiful cartoon, Will Work for Blurbs, meet the author, that Bob drew. So, and I was honored to be in another cartoon that I'm going to share in a blog post. So, Bob, welcome, welcome, welcome. So great to have you here.
Thanks so much. Do we have any more time? How are you doing your time?
Hey,
That was an amazing. I feel so important. I'm on cloud 9 right now.
you are a lauded professional. Let's start at the very beginning. You're a gifted cartoonist, and you draw for the New Yorker, and you draw for these fabulous conferences that I have the fortune to attend and speak at. How did you get your start in being a cartoonist and doing your drawing? Is it something you always had a passion for, or did you kind of fall into it?
You know, it's a couple of things. The first thing and the most important thing is I always wanted to make people laugh. I recall as a little kid, before I could speak, and my family was worried for me because I didn't speak until I was 5 years old. So they brought me to specialists and wondering what was wrong with me. But I was still making jokes. There were certain things I did pantomime, and I would try to make my family laugh. We grew up very poor, grew up in the South Bronx in the projects. And I have a distinct memory at dinner time trying to work this audience, which was easily the most difficult audience you can imagine. I could not get my family to laugh at my jokes, but I feel like that was my first attempt of communicating and trying to be funny. And then when I went through school and high school, I would try to write funny things and I would try to do things in that vein of storytelling. I didn't finish high school, actually. I went to college. I was sneaking in, and then I went to college in the summer while I was supposed to be in high school. I did take my regents early. It took them years earlier. I took my regents, like the math and the physics regents, and I did very well in those. I got like a perfect score. And I did take SATs, but I didn't attend high school at the end. I was attending college. And then when it was time to try to get into college, I was able to use the professors I was sitting in on to write letters of recommendation saying that this student has been illegally in our classroom and doing well. Could we officially have him in our curriculum? And being so poor, I had to get a scholarship because I couldn't afford college, but I was able to get a scholarship. I was on a tennis scholarship. The last time that I was in high school, I played on the tennis team. I had someone teach me, a friend of mine. I got good enough to get tennis scholarships from other schools. So I went to college, finished college, and then I started teaching. They asked me to join the faculty when I was finishing Pratt Institute. And I immediately started teaching, which was a little awkward because there were some students who were a year younger than me, who were my classmates, were now my students, including a girlfriend. So my girlfriend was my classmate. That didn't last. But at the same time, I want to share that in college, I had also an enemy. Everyone in school has enemies. You know, we all have our mortal enemies. I had mine, and they weren't too pleased with me and me not with them. But we ran into each other again 12 years later at a funeral, and we happened to be sitting next to each other. We got along a little better this time, and we eloped to Iceland. And she is my wife, and we started off as enemies.
And how many years have you been happily married for?
I would say 2 out of the 20. No, only joking. We've been happily married all 20 years, and it was in 2000, actually 24 years, and it was in 2000 that we just said to each other, well, this might as well happen. And I broke up with my girlfriend at the time, and I think she was with somebody, and we just let people know we got married in Iceland, sending over postcards. We wrote like 100 postcards to people, letting them know that we were married. And one of the reasons is because I grew up an altar boy in the South Bronx, Catholic. She was brought up Jewish. And so our families we knew would not approve. We eloped because we knew we couldn't have a regular wedding. I'm very happy with my wife. My wife's actually a famous artist, Tamar Stone. She is collected in museums around the world for doing feminist themed book art in which she creates one of a kind books. And she always addresses issues that women had to deal with all through time with all these restrictions that culture have placed on women. And she raised my awareness regarding the struggles of what women had in the Victorian times and all through ages of how women were constrained by all these different perceptions that society placed on them.
I love that. So you married a feminist, and
Absolutely.
that's
Absolutely.
wonderful. And another artist. So you have that alliance. Can I just ask why you hated each other so vehemently? Was it connected to art or just personality?
It was a couple of things. First of all, when I'm told I was very creepy at the time. And I was told that my appearance and general attitude seemed a little off-putting. And on top of it, what really was the last straw was that our teachers always pitted our work against each other. The teacher would say, this is the way to do it, and this is the way not to do it. And I remember her leaving one time a classroom in tears, cursing me because our work again was compared to each other. But at the funeral, we spoke, and I learned that she was doing charity work in the South Bronx and that she was going on Meals on Wheels by herself in a van late at night to these very dangerous neighborhoods. I happen to know that these neighborhoods were not safe. I grew up in the ghetto, and I was very concerned for her. And at that time, I volunteered to go along with her. And then seeing how she handled the homeless people, I totally changed as a person. I saw a saint in action. I fell in love with this person who was handling the strife that people were dealing with on the streets and stuff, and how she behaved. And I became a different person. I was dating vain people before that who, sorry for those who listening, but I was dating people for different reasons, the wrong reasons. And here I was finding someone who could teach me to be a better person. And I made up my mind then and there when I saw her, this is it. This is a person who could change my life. This is the real deal. And it could have been anybody who was in that position, but that person convinced me that I could learn from that person.
That's an amazing story. I feel like that's going to have to be written at some point because it gave you the heart and the humility that maybe you needed to balance yourself out, and you gave her something as well.
And she convinced me to do books. I was always writing for magazines well before I did cartoons and the things that you see me do, the live drawing. I was a writer. I began as a teenager writing and being published in New York Newsday. And I was a columnist for the Village Voice. And I was very well published pretty early on. And I never had the aspiration to do a whole book, but she encouraged me. She gave me the courage and said, it's time for you to do a larger book. You have agents who are asking. And she gave me the courage to do that and helped me decide on what it would be. We broke down, what is it that you want to write about? And in my case, my interests were mysteries and Sherlock Holmes. I wanted to do something unique. I didn't want to do a mystery about crime. I wanted to do something that was like a mystery in life, like who told the first joke or who made the first sandwich. I actually walked into a Barnes and Nobles and said, what do I want to read that's not here? What do I see that's missing? And so in this case, I decided, if it was Christmas time, there was all these Christmas books that were meant for only Catholics. And I was a Catholic and I appreciate that. But then I realized, being married to someone Jewish, where are the books for someone who's non-denominational or who reaches for other people who feel left out? So I decided the mystery was going to be, who made the first snowman? And so I went on a quest. It was my little holy grail. And I spent 7 years traveling around the world. And the first thing I did was, the one lesson I tell all my students is, gather up and surround yourself with talented people. And I got myself a dream team, experts in art history, professors in culture, heads of institutions and museums. And I collected a dream team to piece together this puzzle and try to find out how we could find out when man first started making this art form. And it's an art form, it's an early form of folk art. And I have a different perception of it now because now I see it's really one of the first selfies that man has always wanted to make selfies. Along with cave art, this was an early form of really selfies.
I love that you take it and you package it in a way that we really can understand.
And I have to credit Tim Burton for this because it was his movie Batman that really made me think in terms of how do we take something that's an everyday thing we take for granted and turn it on its head. I do this with everything, whether it's bookstores or museums. We take these things for granted, but these are great institutions that we are letting slip away. In the case of the snowman, I saw Batman and I was expecting the kids' TV show that was very campy. It
Yeah.
was dark and it didn't have a star like Michael Keaton. And so Tim Burton changed our perception of something and showed how something could be seen in a different way. And I did the same thing with the snowman because there are amazing stories that took place in the Middle Ages in which there was the massacre of 1690, one of the bloodiest events in early American history involved snowmen. There's the miracle of 1511 and all these other stories that no one ever heard of. But I found through all these institutions and this dream team helped me discover stories that no one ever heard.
So that's your snowman book. And now what about your cats, the complete book of cat names, right? Because I'm a huge cat person. I had a cat, Percy. He was an orange cat. He lived for 17 beautiful years. Now I have a dog. I love my dog, but I'm a huge cat person. How did you decide to do this book? Do you have a passion for cats? Because you're doing another book, I believe, about cats as well.
I do, but we'll see, every time I start a book, the criteria is different. I know a lot of people are very hung up on the actual results. I'm not interested so much in results always. Sometimes it's about the learning, it's about what comes from it. And in the case of some of these books, it was not in the case of the cat book to be on the New York Times bestseller. It was not to create a great piece of art. That particular book was just a gift. It was a gift to my friends and to people who were suffering during the pandemic. During the pandemic, I wrote 2 books that were just meant to put a smile on your face. I had the expectations were nil. And in this case, I had been making up these funny names for cats. Like I was thinking, like, what if you were at the cat was owned by a Hollywood star? So I thought James Spader. So I was thinking of ways of just making fun with cats. And I happen to have friends with cats. So I decided this was just going to be a distraction from everything that we were all going through, which was still decompressing from that period.
I love it. Kitty Perry. You know, here names if your cat is musical. Kitty Perry or Harry Connick Jr.
I ask everyone I know to contribute names and to be a part of the book, so they felt there was some engagement. And really, it was just an exercise. I just put it in a book. The book is enjoyed by a lot of people. For some people, they said they can read it out loud. There's one chapter about Bubblicious, named on the variation of the name Bubblicious. And I'll give $100 to anyone who could read that list without laughing. It just gets so dumb and silly. And that's all the book is. You know, books have different purposes. And in this case, there was another book I did called The Elements of Stress. That was for my writer friends who love, like me, the elements of style. I grew up with the elements of style and it was so helpful to me. So I did a parody of that. And it's just, again, for fun.
So you start out not exactly as a journalist, but as a writer, writing for publications. How did you move to drawing, to cartooning? How did that evolve?
Well, I was drawing in art school. I loved doing illustration, and I did illustrations for magazines on the side. I mean, I feel like doing all these different things served two purposes. I was always excited about my work and was not getting complacent or bored. And I did have, I had a little bit of talent for drawing. So I felt like it was utilizing that skill. But at the same time, to be very, I think, very realistic now with people listening, this is not an easy business. And I learned that really early on that I was going to have a few careers juggling and see which one kind of sticks. My sort of image of this whole career for me from the very beginning was I'm making these paper airplanes and I'm throwing them out the window. And some of them are to do illustration jobs, some of them are to teach or to speak or to draw. And I don't know where these paper airplanes going to go, but some of them catch. And sometimes people come back to me for work and other things don't work out. A perfect example was the New Yorker cartoons. The New Yorker cartoons was not really on my agenda. It was a dare. I was at a birthday dinner for me, and I was with Sam Gross, the world's greatest New Yorker cartoonist. And he said, you should try New Yorker cartoons. And it was just a dare. And the first one I drew and submitted, they published. And from there, it was off to the races. And I really enjoyed doing the cartoons. I still enjoy doing cartoons, but like everything else, everything has its time. And the person who hired me was fired. And now I'm not really in the magazine hardly ever. The magazine doesn't know me. I'm older than everyone else there. There's really not a place for me, unfortunately. And so I have to adjust. I have to pivot. I have to look at my career and say, where can I go? Where will my work be best appreciated? And I did the bookstore book because I was worried about independent bookstores. And I knew that there would be an audience for that. And during the pandemic, I appreciated the fact of how much museums were struggling because people weren't getting out. And I love museums, but then I learned that I really love museums because when I started the project, oh my goodness, I was so inspired. I was going to these places more than I had ever been to before. And that was a dream job to do this last book.
You put stories and you also did paintings, artwork.
I try to make them sexy. And there are some stories that are adult that take place in the book. Stories of where people propose or consummate a relationship inside a museum. And so there's a little for everybody. And it's not a children's book. It's meant for adults to get excited about revisiting museums that they've forgotten about, or they want to learn about a certain subject, or they didn't even know a museum about the subject existed. There's a museum about motherhood. There's a museum about spam. There's a museum, not the obvious ones like sports, which I try to avoid things that I think are obvious. I'm trying to turn the page to something that you wouldn't have known existed.
I think that's so wonderful that you did that and put a new lens on museums. And the stories are fabulous. Like one of them, you said it was a museum that convinced Bill Murray not to commit suicide, and another one where Michelle and Barack Obama went on their first date.
It's very classy. You really score points with your date if you show you're cultured, and then if you go beforehand and have some fun facts to drop in the conversation, makes you sound very cultured. As far as the Bill Murray story, it was in the same museum, the Art Institute of Chicago, that he was at a breaking point early in his career. And he was on his way to commit suicide when on the way he stopped in to the museum. And there was a painting that moves him so much and told a story without words that convinced him that life was worth struggling for. And it got him past this dark period and allowed him to reconsider his future. But that's, to me, that's the beauty of art. I mean, I think at first people take it like on the surface that it's just art. But like books, you could be moved to a point that it changes your life. A single piece of artwork, and it did for me. There were pieces in my head I have to go back to see again because I was so moved by it, and it helped me also finish the book. I felt an obligation to say this story and to share what I learned. And also, I was so inspired. I got home, I was so exhilarated by seeing what other people created and seeing great artists. I mean, that's what a great book does too to me. If I read a book that says, "Oh my God, I want to sit down now and tell my story," and it just you just go.
You know what strikes me about you? Like you told your story about not speaking until you were 5, so you had selective mutism. But at that same time, while you weren't expressing yourself verbally, you were taking in and observing the world around you. And I think a great artist or somebody who wants to create does that. They take in the world and then they create and put their lens on it, which is what you do with your drawing. And I want to pivot a little bit now to process, because I'm fascinated by process. I'm fascinated by the structure that people use to create art. So can you tell me 2 things? One, your process when you're drawing. And by the way, you've created a whole new niche for yourself, because you're somebody that organizations and associations bring to events, but you've
Yeah,
really made a name for yourself, particularly with people who are new maybe to the field or new writers. So I
yeah.
think that's an amazing and very adaptive way that you have worked your career.
What my process is number one, learning. And I've learned from Jane Friedman and other people, and I've learned, for instance, from you. For instance, you had an episode with Michelson. I took notes, and I'm constantly learning something new from the other.
Yeah, Noah Michelson is he's the editorial director for HuffPost Personal. Yeah, great
And I
episode.
recommend people going back to listening to that episode and Amy Ferris and some other episodes where the process is that I'm learning what other people do, what works, learning what readers want, and then you kind of piece it together. Because I don't have a process per se. Every time we do something, whether it's a book about cats or you're doing a cat cookbook or whatever you decide is your thing, the process is going to be different. I mean, there's certain principles that you keep in mind. There's a North Star that you have that you say you have a certain standard, but the process to getting from point A to B could be different. And that's why it's so exciting. It's not going to be a formula. It's going to be something that's going to be something new to you. And the principles I'd like to share really just quick, one would include fear. I think that is a very big thing that we see today. It's this censorship of yourself or other people censoring your humor or other things because they're afraid of what becomes of it. It's fear of what might happen if you put out something that you think people are not going to like and you're being judged. When I do my drawings for the live drawings, fear and decision making is the 2 principles. One is I'm not going to be upset if it doesn't come out perfect. I'm doing like about 3 or 4 drawings a day, if not more. I can't be hung up on saying it has to be perfect. No, it's me. It's real.
When you say live drawings, Bob means when he's at an event and somebody is up there on stage speaking or teaching or being a keynoter, and he is sitting there with his pad furiously drawing away and then having to go to the next event. That's
Yeah.
what live drawing is.
Noah talked about this in the episode about writing naturally and being real and not being writerly. When I'm doing the drawing and stuff, I don't have fear. It's okay that I make mistakes. It's okay. I'm human. Not every piece is going to come out right. The museum book, I did the best I could. Is it perfect? No. But the point is I'm being playful. When children are playing, they're not worried about being judged. When you're a little kid playing, you're just having fun, and as a result, you're being creative. You're coming across ideas and you're reaching avenues that you would not come to if you were not being playful.
This is a great point that you're making. And in fact, this year, after 3 decades and different sides of publishing as an editor and a signing editor and a writer and teacher, I said to myself, I'm only going to do things professionally that bring me joy. And that lightens my load,
Yes.
makes me able to give the way that I want to give to the students that I'm working with, to the places that I'm speaking at, and to the creative writing work that I'm dedicating myself to doing. And so there are things that I'm not going to do that I used to do that were more work a day or technical or things like that. And it's been a conscious decision because it's going back to that sense. I want to have the creative play in what I'm producing and what I'm
Yeah.
doing. And I love that you thought so deeply about that and said it.
Now, how do you reach the state of playfulness? Do you feel like you're in a zone of where you're being creative and you no longer worry about judgment? Is there a certain routine that you do find yourself to get into that?
Oh, you're interviewing the interviewer. I love it.
Oh, yeah, it switched. It's over.
I mean, I would say for me, I have to feel passionate about what I'm doing. If I'm not passionate about it, then I'm not going to take the energy to get it on the page, right? Like, for example, I'm working on memoir now. I've been talking to people in that memoir world who are
Yeah,
saying,
yeah.
yes, go for it. And so that's gotten me enlivened and feeling that, yes, I'm going to play and I'm going to play with form. And even people who I've had on the program, like Maggie Smith, she played with different forms. And I think that is so key because it's a bestseller. And not that that's the focus of anything, but the fact that she was able to do it the way she wanted to do it was very interesting to me. And it is
Yeah.
part of, I think you have to be able to play and be creative, but you also have to know your craft. So you have built your craft over the years. I've done the same. And so you can play. They always say, like, Beethoven, and I'm not equating ourselves to Beethoven, but Beethoven could change chords. He could do different things because he knew what to do with the music. It's the same thing with great poets, right? They knew the craft. And a beginner probably couldn't do that. They couldn't break the rules. They couldn't do it in a playful way because they're still learning craft. Do you agree with that premise?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few points I want to add. One is that it's a given that you have the craft. And sometimes you want to pull away the craft so it doesn't overwhelm you and you become a slave to craft. Because I see people overwrite. But going back to getting into the state of playfulness, I'd like to share just one or two tips. There are nuts and bolts because people listening might say, well, what's exactly a way of getting into the state? And I would like to share that maybe a walk or clearing your head so you decrease the amount of distractions you have. Distractions like always listening to, like I do, the news in the background, or maybe getting emails and things like that. So there's actually ways of getting the playfulness that is necessary so you can hear the voice in the back of your head. And this is why some of us get our best ideas in the shower when we can't be distracted again and we finally have that moment of quiet. And I think there's that. The other thing is deadlines, I don't think are conducive to being creative because it adds anxiety. And I think that anxiety and fear are the opposite of being playful and joyful. I don't understand why bosses think they're going to get their best work from people when they say, I need this on my desk Monday at 10 a.m. instead of saying, I know you're going to do a great job, enjoy the weekend. And I say this to my students, or I say this to my friends even. I always say, you have to have fun. If you're not going to have fun doing this, it's not going to be your best work.
I agree. And in my book, And Writing That Gets Noticed, I have a whole section on how to beat writer's block. And I said things that you said, taking a walk. You can also change the font if you're working in like Times Roman,
Oh,
make
that's a good idea.
Comic Sans, make it some other font. I always pull like a very unusual font because
Yeah.
it changes the brain pattern. You want to get to like a beta state. If you want to get technical, you want to be a beta state, which is the more receptive state, and it's a softer state for the brain. You could do things. For me, when I'm stuck, I watch bad reality TV with the captions on.
You know, it's funny you should say that. I do something similar, but what I do is I turn off the sound and I imagine what they're saying.
That's
And I
interesting.
imagine funny captions or story developments, and I'm in my own dream world, but I have that as a foundation just to get my mind going. And I do find that once you get started, it's a little easier. Sometimes it's just hard to get the first thing going. And
And then get into flow, that state of flow where you don't know time has passed. Does that happen to you? Not for the live drawing,
oh,
so
that's a
much
good
maybe
sign.
writing.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
good sign. So let me get back to interviewing you. So do you have feedback, a sounding board for when you're doing something and you're beginning doing the story? Do you find that you have some reliable sources that can tell you if you're on that right track, or do you trust your own instincts?
Oh, that's a good one. For anything journalistic, I completely trust my own instincts and I never run it by anybody else. I've been doing it so long, that's a given. For essays, I run it by my husband. My husband of almost 19 years. So he is the person who, if there's anything really personal that I'm writing, I vet it with him. And now that my daughter is 14, and there's a meme going around where the parent is like the dog, and then the teenager is a bear. Like, so the parent says, "Oh, and how was your morning?" And the teenager goes, "Grr." Well, that's the stage we're in right now. So that's a lovely, lovely stage.
Does she like anything you do?
Oh, no, no, no. She thinks I chew too loud. I laugh funny.
You do, you do.
I know, and
I'm
I've
in agreement with
accepted
her.
it's part of me.
I give my work to my wife, and my wife always says, "This is not funny." So
And
the lesson there is if anybody does want to do some humor and they're writing a funny piece and they need feedback, do not share it with my wife. I've seen enough of your podcasts and from meeting with you that we share also another problem that we both have, and that we're both workaholics.
you get me. Thank you.
And
Thank
I think our spouses have both, I'm going to guess, your husband, like my wife, has tried to reel us in and not to say yes to everything. Let me know when you do a podcast on the subject of boundaries so I make sure I watch it because I need that class. Because you're supposed to say no to things, but I just go ahead and do everything anyway.
No, because you pivot. You go into the thing that looks interesting to you. And I think that's a great way. And I've seen you in action at these conferences. I mean, you talk to everyone, you're very friendly, but you're also very, very super, super laser focused on what you're doing there and, accomplishing what you need to accomplish.
This has been great. I really have enjoyed this because it's not often I get a chance to do a deep dive. A lot of times people talk about more superficial things and they want to talk about my cartoons and stuff.
What are some actionable tips to, get the attention of the reader?
Well, I'm flattered that you asked me, and I'm happy to share tips. There's so many different tips I could think of, but let me think. You mentioned Substack.
Yeah.
Let me share really quickly one tip that I was just taught myself,
Yeah.
and that is you want to get blurbs from other people who Substack, and there's a setting in your newsletter that allows you to show these blurbs on your homepage. And I'm finding that that validation really helps increase people to trust. And trust is a big thing. The other tip I'll give with my books in general is that first page is so crucial. That first page, you have to win over the reader's trust. You have to understand that you're creating a playground. but there has to be logic to the playground too. You can't just do anything. And I've seen people destroy their book because they break their own rules that they set up. Every playground that you create, it's in your imagination, does have some rules, and you have to abide by them. And if by page 3, all of a sudden your protagonist is taken by a UFO, and there was nothing that was coming before that, you're going to lose the reader's trust. So I value the relationship that I'm developing with the reader from the get-go, in which I'm developing some kind of understanding, the understanding that you're investing time in my book, and I'm not going to make you waste your time. And then that's a tip that I keep in mind as for a more superficial tip that's just mechanical. I would say I try to wake up at 5:30 in the morning to work when there's no emails coming in, and I try to get in a certain amount of writing before anything hits the fan, because by 9 o'clock, I'm already getting emails that are filled with good news, bad news, and things I didn't expect from life, publishing, and everywhere. And then all of a sudden, life rears its ugly head. So I have to carve out that time.
Absolutely. Bob, what's next for you? And also, what's your dream? Share your dream, your professional dream.
My dream would be that people would go to my newsletter, The Bob, and we start a community there where I'm not reliant on the magazines. The magazines I used to be in, I used to love these magazines.
Yeah.
My dream was to be in Sports Illustrated. As a kid, that's what I read. I read not because of the swimsuit issue. I love the sports. I love the illustrations. And
Sure.
that
Well,
was
you were in tennis. You got a tennis scholarship.
yeah, I
So,
love the visuals and the excitement of the magazine. I love the New Yorker. Well, Sports Illustrated went under.
yeah.
The New Yorker now is using young people from and a sense of humor that I don't quite understand. I have to be honest, it's not my sense of humor. So I want a place for people to go who like my sense of humor or feel like they can learn something from me. So I'm hoping that grows, and it has been growing. And my dream is just that, publishing stays healthy and that people are able to keep on doing their books and stuff. And what's next for me is I'm working on a book on great writers, and it's made up of people like Margaret Atwood and Joyce Carol Oates, who I upset because my first portrait of her she didn't like, and I redid it, and now she loves it. So I've been drawing and painting all these different writers and telling their story with a little bio. And that's going to be my next project, as well as some other books that have started. And so things have been good. I'm hoping that the museum book winds up in the gift shops of museums, so they have something to take home with them, and that people, can have other museums to go to. Once they go to the one museum, then they get inspired to continue on their museum quest and make that the summerification.
That's beautiful. And it's a beautiful book. So,
And there's museums for writers. There's the Mark Twain Museum, which I'll be doing a talk there live, and it's a beautiful museum. There's a museum for writers in Chicago, the American Writers Museum, and they have a really high-end, state-of-the-art interactive thing there, and it's a lot of fun. I'm going to be going for the first time. I didn't go there in person yet, but I'm on my way to the National Comedy Center. And that's all about writing comedy and performing comedy, but it's also for writers.
where is the Mark Twain Museum and where is the National Comedy Center?
The Mark Twain Museum is in Hartford,
Okay.
Connecticut, and the Chicago Museum is in downtown somewhere. It's like right in downtown. And the Comedy Center is in Jamestown, New York. It's going to be a 6.5 hour drive, and that's why I didn't make it yet. But I'm on my way now. Finally got some gas in the car. And it's in the town of Lucille Ball. That's where she was born, and she has a museum there herself.
Amazing. And probably also the Irma Bombeck Museum, right?
Well, I've been to that. That's really great. And that's in Dayton, Ohio. And I encourage people to go back to the writings of Irma Bombeck, because it's a little bit forgotten. It's a little, time has passed. But every time I do go back to stuff, I'm surprisingly, amused, and I think it's really great.
Yeah, I need to get the septic tank book again and have that with me, the one that she wrote. Bob, this has been so wonderful, and I've loved this discussion that we've had. It's just been fabulous. Thank you so much.
No, it's a privilege for me to get this chance. You really are such a great interview with me. I'm sorry I didn't ask you more questions and made it about me, but I really enjoy this, and I'm going to share this because I think that we did make some very good points, and I really believe that what we said can be helpful.
Yeah, no, this is going to be helpful to writers and artists everywhere. So thank you so much again. Follow me at EstelleSErasmus.com on my website and on social media, which is Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Estelle S. Erasmus. And we're now on YouTube for Freelance Writing Direct. Follow along, and soon everyone will be reading what you're writing.